Hi, my name is Nancy Najelski. I'm a member of the Environment Committee who's sponsoring this event, aren't they? We'll have a Q&A after it's over with. Nancy Hirsh is here tonight to talk to us. She is the Executive Director of the Northwest Energy Coalition. It was formed in 1981. The coalition is dedicated to fulfilling the promises of the 1980 Pacific Northwest Electric Power and Conservation Act of 1980. You didn't know I knew that, did you? I read it on your website. The coalition is an alliance of over 100 environmental, civic, and human services organizations, utilities, and businesses in Oregon, Idaho, Montana, and British Columbia, along with many individual members. The coalition's mission is to advance clean, equitable, and affordable energy policies to enhance investments in energy efficiency, renewable resources, and energy services for lower-income communities. And I'd like to now officially welcome Nancy as a honorary member of the Nancy Club at Horizon House. Please join me in welcoming her tonight.
Thank you, Nancy. I don't get to say that very often, so I'm just delighted. Nice to see everyone, and thank you for coming out this evening. And as Nancy said, the Northwest Energy Coalition is been around a long time for advocacy organizations from 1981. And our mission, I wanted to just say one thing about our mission that has evolved from watchdogging the implementation of the Northwest Power Act, which is the shorthand for the long act that Nancy read, is to work with utilities, policymakers, state leaders on implementing clean energy and affordability programs for communities. So we work with policymakers, utilities, regulators, governing boards of utilities, kind of as a watchdog and as a outside technical expert to provide advice, share knowledge from our work across the 4 Northwest states and nationally. So we work with the Bonneville Power Administration, which is a regional federal power marketing agency that is part of the U.S. Department of Energy, which is part of the regional power system. And then we work locally with utilities and policymakers, governing boards of public utilities and private utilities on their programs. So we kind of have our hands in a lot of different pots, but all directed towards a clean, affordable, and equitable energy system that provides benefits to communities. And I want to thank the Environment Committee, Bill, Jean, Roger, Nancy, for inviting me to come and talk and share what we're working on with what we're calling the harmonious grid. And hopefully that's not mine. Okay. No worries. It's the new age, you know, phones ring, Zooms drop, internet connections, you lose them. You know, we just have to roll with it. I joined the Northwest Energy Coalition in 1996, and I was just talking to May about my boss, was Sarah Patton, who worked at Seattle City Light with her, and I'm still there at the Northwest Energy Coalition, which you know, makes me want to, I feel like I'm kind of an auto worker. You know, you start a Boeing worker where you come in and you work your whole career there. Not quite my whole career, because I spent 12 years in Washington, D.C. working on federal energy policy before I came out here. But 96 to today, I've seen a lot of change in the utility industry and the energy sector and our relationship with electricity and power. and it has changed. So what we're going to talk about today is Washington's clean energy path, where we're going, and I'm focusing on Washington today, really, but a lot of what I say is applicable across any state or any region. We'll talk about the transformation that the power system is undergoing right now, the concept of a harmonious grid from our perspective, what it means, and then what the new opportunities are for new resources. And Roger and I were reflecting before we started. We worked together. Roger was a pro bono attorney representing the Northwest Energy Coalition in early 2000 with one of our colleagues in a case with Puget Sound Energy and the Washington Utilities and Transportation Commission. So it was a pleasure to come into the lobby and see a familiar face. So I really appreciate the connection with folks in this community, with the community that I've been working in. So this, as Nancy said, is kind of who we are. And I'll just note that we're kind of a policy shop. We're not really like a grassroots mobilization organization. Our team of staff, and we have staff in Oregon, Washington, Montana, and we don't have staff in Idaho, but we work in Idaho. And we're mostly regulatory and policy staff. And we provide, as I said, kind of that analytic expertise to utilities and to our colleagues in the environmental, consumer, low-income, civic community, even the clean energy business community. They rely on us for kind of the expert opinions on policies or utility programs. So that's the niche that we fill in the community. And one of the things that has been true for our organization since we were founded in 1981 is the issue of affordability. So we're kind of part environmental clean energy advocates and part consumer advocates, because everyone needs access to affordable electricity. It is now a fundamental right to have access in order to live, to have food, heat, children be able to read and do their schoolwork. Everybody needs electricity, and it has to be affordable. And we have to have the benefits of clean electricity in communities. And so those are some of the issues that were critical when we were founded in 1981 and are equally critical today in 2023. So it's an important thread through both the environmental and consumer issues are tied in the energy space, inextricably linked, one might say. So Washington's energy future is changing. This graph shows the reduction in our emissions that state law now is mandating. And this shows the decarbonization kind of path that we are needing to be on. Our current emissions in 2018, which was the benchmark that the Washington's Climate Commitment Act established as a baseline for emissions, and then where we need to go. 95% below 1990 levels and net zero emissions. This is a scary path, I have to say. I admit it. I mean, it is going to be tough to get our emissions down, and that's even in a state that has a clean energy mix relatively to other states. But this is where we have to go if we're going to really push back on the impacts of climate change, which we're already seeing in our region. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And our colleagues say, oh, wait a minute, here we go, I can do this. Ooh, this is the toughest part. This is a very steep, near-term change. But we're actually making pretty good progress on that because the coal plants that have operated and served Washington are closing. So that is going to, and being replaced by clean energy resources, both on the large scale, wind, solar, geothermal, biomass, and the customer side. So I just wanted to give you a picture of the challenge we face as we talk about our clean energy transition. So also from the deep decarbonization pathways work, and this was done by a group called the Clean Energy Transformation Institute, and they're kind of a research think tank, and they do mostly focused on clean energy and decarbonization of not just the electric sector, but transportation and industry, agriculture, kind of doing those deeper dives into what do we really need to invest in order to make this transition happen in a way that is affordable for communities and businesses and individuals. But one of the, I'll draw your attention with my handy pointer to this section. This is electrification. In order to reduce emissions in our economy, most of the emissions in Washington State come from the transportation sector, right? That's because our power, we have a lot of hydropower. 65% of our electricity in Washington State comes from hydropower. So that, and then we're closing our coal plants, so the contribution of the power sector is not that much. Transportation is the big problem. And the #1 solution for transportation is electrification, electric vehicles. And then for heavy duty vehicles, maritime, aviation, they're looking at biofuels, hydrogen. But for passenger cars, metro buses, lots of school buses, we're electrifying them. And then the other source of emissions in our state is buildings, natural gas, heating, water heating, cooking. The biggest issue is heating. And again, in commercial and residential buildings, electrification is the primary strategy. Other fuels will be other biofuels, hydrogen, again, will be important in industrial process, heavy transportation. So a lot of the gas utility industry and the pipeline companies are beginning to look at how can they get into those sectors and transition out of gas in the residential and small commercial buildings sector, because that's not really the future for them. But what that does, if we electrify buildings and we electrify transportation, is it creates a huge increase in electricity consumption. Again, kind of a scary number when we look at those two charts next to each other. A 100% increase in electricity use by 2050. That's big. And again, I mentioned it a little earlier, depending on the water year, we're between 54 and 65% hydro in our electricity mix. And this is the 2020 fuel mix. The 2021 fuel mix isn't posted yet, but supposedly in May, but I didn't see it when I went to look. So I anticipate if we were to look at the 2021 fuel mix, the wind wedge would be bigger and the coal wedge is going to be a little smaller, because between this year and 2021, the one unit of the Centralia coal plant down in Centralia, Washington closed. And 2 of the units at the Boardman coal plant in Montana closed, and that is owned by Washington Utilities and other state utilities. So the coal wedge has gotten smaller, the renewable energy wedges are bigger. But as we look out into the future, those wedges are going to have to be even bigger. So now I want to talk about what we mean by a harmonious grid. The image on the left, the traditional grid, used to be one way. We had a big power plant out there somewhere, and power lines brought it into the load center, into our community. Basically, one-way power service. And we as customers, we just turned on the light. That was the end of the relationship. Paid the bill, turned on the light. Now, the future grid is a lot more complicated because it is more interactive. Some people have electric vehicles, some people have solar on their house. There's community solar projects and community wind projects, and we've got battery storage. You might have a battery storage unit in this building. And so those are dispatching into the system. So now you as a customer are sending power into the grid. And the past of one central power plant way out somewhere is now being replaced by power plants that are spread all over. We have much greater geographic diversity with our renewable energy resources, wind and solar, geothermal, biomass. And they operate differently. Obviously, when the sun goes down, the solar goes away. But we're also in a region where when the sun goes down and it's at night, the wind picks up. So our wind resources come on. So the system is more complicated. And it is more sophisticated. And it is more interactive than it has ever been. And that creates a lot of opportunity for us to participate in that clean energy future and make sure that we're actually bringing those benefits to communities. So when we talk about a harmonious grid, we like to talk about it as really an orchestra, right? With the utility kind of in the center. And lots of diverse resources that they are the conductor of and managing. Customer resources, some distributed wind, some central station solar, batteries, your electric vehicle, we want to discharge it back into the grid so that it provides energy to the grid when you're not using it. And being a conductor of the system to make a more harmonious system is really the vision that we see. And it requires the utility to be more of an active manager of the energy system. And customers, not necessarily, doesn't require a lot of work from us, because the future is, again, more automated. And your appliances are going to come already with a chip in it that talks to the grid. And the utility says, can I talk to your refrigerator? And I'll pay you $5 a month in order to let me talk to your refrigerator. And we say, okay. And then they're going to manage when that refrigerator starts to cycle. Or your furnace, or your air conditioning unit, your heat pump, or your electric vehicle, or the solar panels on your roof. Right now, Washington State was the first state that passed a law requiring this smart chip in electric water heaters. So now when new water heaters are sold in Washington State, they come with a chip already in them. And now the utility has to talk to my water heater. And your water heater is a giant battery. Think about your water heater as a giant battery. It's all that hot water. Well, rather than it really kicking on to be heated at 7 a.m. right when everybody else is turning on their water heater or jumping in the shower and peak is going up. What if the utility turned on your water heater at 5 o'clock in the morning and preheated your water and then turned it off at 7 o'clock or turned it down? You have plenty of hot water stored. And then at 8:30, when the peak is gone, they restore your water heater to normal operations. It seems crazy because there are millions of us, and how could they possibly control them? But you'd be surprised at the software out there that can control that. So that's what we mean by the harmonious grid. Again, another illustration of the sophisticated nature of our power system and what it is looking like. And it really is creating, empowering communities to be engaged in the power system. And that is providing benefits rather than being kind of at the mercy of the power providers, but in putting us at the table so that we can engage them and participate in making sure that our communities get all these benefits. And again, my illustration of the utility as the conductor. And I'm going to zero in on it in the next part of the conversation to the more specifics of what makes the customer side set of resources so interesting. And I will note that there's the right here where it says demand side storage. This is where electric vehicles, your water heater, battery, storage comes into play. We've never had that kind of resource in our electric system before. And it is really a game changer. And then the other part of the power system transition that is a game changer is this one right here, demand reduction and what I would call demand management. That example I gave you about your water heater. In our region, we haven't really had to worry too much about peak energy use because with a hydroelectric base, you just crank the river flow a little bit and you can meet all of your needs. It follows your load up or down. The hydro system was the battery for our region, but that's changing. Climate change is impacting our hydrograph and our hydro system in a way that we need to take pressure off of the hydro system and use other storage tools in our toolbox. And that's where cars, water heaters, batteries come into the mix. So when I talk about the customer side portfolio of resources, and I apologize, in talking to Jean and email exchanges with Roger, I went deep into the data and the analysis. So that I figured that was okay here.
I like it.
Yep. So Energy efficiency is our second biggest resource in the region, after hydropower. That's a big resource since 1978. And the Pacific Northwest has led the nation in our energy efficiency. And that's building codes, appliance standards, weatherization of homes, making sure our equipment is efficient. And you can see the cumulative savings that energy efficiency investments have brought to our power system. So energy efficiency has saved 7,500 average megawatts. The load of Seattle City Light to serve its service territory, the city of Seattle and a few neighboring towns, communities, 1,100 average megawatts. So the energy efficiency for the region is a big resource. And it is expected to continue on that upward trajectory as a resource for our communities. And that comes, again, from codes, building codes, energy codes, and weatherization investments in our existing buildings. It is the #1 investment cities, communities, people should make, businesses, in their facilities, because it saves them money and it reduces consumption overall. And this kind of compares the Northwest to the rest of the country on per capita energy use, right? We are, and this is an old chart from 2010, and I went to the folks in California who made this at Lawrence Berkeley Lab and asked them if they had a new one, and I didn't get a response. But from what I know is that line continues. This line stays and continues to decline on per capita use compared to the rest of the country, which is also beginning to come down but has flattened. So we are saving, that's all money in our pockets, that difference between the blue line and the red line. We have to make an investment, but over the life of the investment, we are saving billions of dollars in our region because of energy efficiency. So, #1 resource in the harmonious grid when the utility is looking to manage that system. Then we move to the role of management, and when it costs a lot in our power system and when it actually pollutes the most. And that's during the peak times, when we're using more energy and our base power system might be taxed. And then we turn to mostly our natural gas fired peaking power plants to meet these peak needs. So the goal of managing load, like your water heater and your electric vehicle, putting in distributed storage, basic energy conservation, don't do your laundry right during peak times, wait till after peak, basic conservation measures. That is all a part of reducing the peak. Because when we have to meet power at peak, it costs, everybody's trying to meet peak. So the price of power across the Washington state, across the region, goes up because the demand has gone up. Everybody's trying to purchase extra power to serve their customers' load during those peak times. So the more we can shave that peak, bring it down, move it, flatten it, the cheaper it is for customers, and the less polluting it is because we're not firing up those gas peaking units that are serving to meet those high peaks. And these types of what we call demand response, meaning I call you as a utility, I send you a signal, and I ask you to change your demand. And I say, again, I'm going to pay you because you're helping reduce costs on the system to have you reduce your demand. And part of that's going to be just a signal that you've already agreed to that comes into your house and goes into your appliances and your equipment. It might be for some of the big industrials a decision they make. Oh my gosh, we've got delivery of our widget tomorrow. There's no way I can slow my load or reduce my peak. I'm going to tell the utility, no thanks. Not today. I'm not reducing my load. So there's give and take between the utility and its customers on how they reduce demand. But this is an essential piece. If we're adding, if you go back to that chart at the beginning, and we're increasing our electric load, the amount of new power generation we have to build to meet that new load is breathtaking. And the key to reducing that is the demand side, is customers, community-based energy resources, and managing our load more effectively, participating in the energy system. Essential. And the other part of the energy system that is different than what we've had historically, as I mentioned earlier, the hydro system was our battery and is our battery, mostly. But now there's some competition in the marketplace with a whole variety of different kinds of storage. It's not just electric vehicle batteries or Elon Musk's Powerwall. It's a lot more interesting and diverse storage technologies than we've really had before. And some of these technologies have been around for decades, but there's never been much interest in them because we've had the hydro system. Now, there's really interesting new technologies that are beginning to take off that have a longer life than a 2 or 4 hour battery that might be how much your car can contribute. 10-hour storage, multi-day storage. These are all things that, again, help the utility as the conductor manage the system in a way that makes it more reliable and more flexible. One of the things on thermal storage that is kind of a cool basic technology, it's creating an ice block on your roof, giant ice cube. Overnight, when load is low, creating a giant ice cube. And then during the day in the summer, they just blow air over it and create cool air and pump that through the building. Right? Very low tech, super efficient, very low cost. It's technologies like that that are beginning to emerge onto the landscape that are very interesting and exciting for an energy nerd like me. And I just spoke with a colleague who has been working for a utility based in Oregon and Utah, Pacific Corp. In Washington State, it's called Pacific Power. And he's been there 20 years. But he's leaving at the end of this month to go work for a company that makes compressed air storage. Like big scale where they pressurize air and they pump it into the ground and it gets even more pressurized, and then they bring it up and it spins a turbine and makes electricity. I mean, it's a cool technology, and it's being used in Europe, and they're building one in Southern California. So again, he's taking taken a big step into kind of the new clean energy economy from a very traditional utility perspective, because that's where he sees the future going. It's exciting. And I would also mention that lithium ion is, I'm going to predict 10 years it's not going to be the battery of choice. It's going to fade. And some of these other batteries that are listed here are going to overtake lithium ion as the battery of choice. We may still see lithium ion in cars, but for all other battery, it's going to be some of these other new technologies that are have less environmental impact, less risk, and are more cost effective over time. So we'll see, but I'm keeping my eye out on the new technology front. Why do all of this, I guess, is the kind of the fundamental question. Why evolve our system and put the new customer resources, kind of that community scale, customer-oriented portfolio of technologies forward? What are the system benefits for doing that? You might see the individual benefits. Gives you more flexibility, provides money, provides value to your home, your business, but there are lots of system benefits that are part of that interactive grid of the future, where, again, communities are a key piece to that, and creating a system that is more reliable and more flexible. And then also the social benefits, working at the community level and engaging in development of demand response programs, load management, energy efficiency, distributed storage, microgrids that connect neighborhoods. Those are labor intensive, which put people to work, provide economic benefits at the local level for communities, and brings technology into communities where they traditionally have not had the benefit of those technologies. So there's more reasons than just the power system to invest in the customer and community side of the power system. And here in Seattle, Seattle City Light has 2 different microgrid projects that it's working on that are, again, distributed storage, distributed solar, energy efficiency, demand management, and they're connecting it all in a management system with the neighborhood. One is up at the Miller Playfield area in Capitol Hill, and one is in South Park. And they're doing another electrification and microgrid project. It's not up and running yet, and in partnership with Puget Sound Energy in Tukwila. So there's a lot of kind of interesting, innovative stuff happening that is fun to see and good for community engagement in the power system in the future. So I am going to pause there and take questions if folks have them.
One of the results of climate change is the increase in air conditioners in Seattle. What's the impact of that on the system?
It's going to be significant. It's not significant yet, but the long-term solution is moving to heat pumps, which provide both heating and air conditioning, rather than just an air conditioning unit separate from your furnace. So the heat pump technology provides you with both, and is a more efficient. What's that?
Can you do it in a big building like this?
You can. There are commercial scale heat pumps that are, a building this big, I'm not 100% sure, but I could find out for you. But it is definitely a more efficient technology. 15 years ago, I would not have said that. But heat pump technology has advanced so much that now there is, we used to say, no, it was better to use a gas furnace and air conditioning because gas was more efficient in your home. Because heat pumps were not efficient yet. Now the technology has advanced so much that we're not promoting gas at all for residential and commercial, because electric heat pumps are so much more efficient and they provide cooling. So it is, it was a game changer in the transition of the technology. But as far as the impact on electric load, yeah, we go back to that chart which shows the electric load going like this. Part of that is air conditioning. And again, that can be managed. We've worked a lot with Idaho Power in Boise, Idaho. They're a summer peaking utility in South Idaho, so their main heating, or their main peak season is the summer. So they have had an air conditioner load control program for 15 years. And they put a radio signal controller on participants' air conditioners. And when they started, there were like 7,000 participants in their community who wanted the radio controller on their air conditioner. Now it's about 45,000 customers. And they pay them, when they started it was $7 a month. I don't know what it is now. But for the ability to cycle their air conditioner within a 2 to 4 degree window and for no longer than 2 hours. And you can override it as a customer and say, no thank you. I have a house full of people today, I need the air conditioner. Or, nope, I'm gone, go for it, cycle. And we're going to see more of those as we become a region with a summer peak. Right now, we've been a winter peaking region, but that's changing. And in about 5 years, the summer and the winter peak are going to be equal in Seattle and Washington and Oregon, which is a big change.
With the compressed air storage underground, does the air go into a man-made container of some sort or directly into the ground? Because it would seem to disrupt water systems and other things.
Yep, and it's both actually, and it depends on the system. Some are using natural salt caverns or gaps in the landscape, and they have to be careful of hydraulic fracking, which comes when you inject either air or liquid into the ground, and try and avoid that. So that's a goal of the compressed air folks, is to not have that happen. The guy that I know who's moving over to this company, they're using man-made storage systems that they're putting underground, and they're not that deep, so they're able to contain the air and pressurize it both naturally and artificially before they bring it up. So it's a depends on the system.
Yes, why not solar panels on rooftops in the city?
So, the question was solar panels on rooftops in the city. Great question. We should have solar panels on every roof in the city. That would be, if I could snap my fingers, I would do that. There are a couple reasons we don't. The code doesn't require solar panels on the roof, and that's something that advocates are pushing for. As far as retrofitting existing buildings, we were talking about this earlier. With a lot of we've all flown in and out of SeaTac, you see all the warehouses in Federal Way and Tukwila, and you think, wow, why don't they put solar on all of that? And one of the main reasons is those warehouses weren't built with the infrastructure to hold solar. They are reinforced really just around their rooftop HVAC units. So it changes the economics if you have to go in and reinforce the roof before you put solar on. So that's the part where there's funding from the federal infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act that actually supports not just the solar, but the building upgrade part, which is really, really great. Just like electric vehicles, having the vehicle is one thing, but people may need, if they're going to charge at home, a panel upgrade. And now you just put another $10,000 into the cost of that electric vehicle, and it becomes prohibitive. So there's also funding from the feds for panel upgrades associated with both heat pumps and electric vehicles. So again, two things where the appliance or the piece of equipment is one thing, but the infrastructure part is another that we often overlook in planning and in program development and design, and how we do the math to make things pencil out.
Nancy, that leads me to my question. I've spent much of my career working in organizations, and my experience is that we are a competitive culture. We are not a collaborative, cooperative culture. Now, I've caught glimpses of how this may be overcome, but I'm wondering if you could address that directly.
Very interesting question. Well, I'll give you an example of the competitive nature actually being a benefit in our energy efficiency world. So there was a company called O-Power. It's now owned by Oracle. And they had the idea that what motivates people to make energy efficiency investments in their home. You know, you can go to their house, knock on the door and say, it'll save you money, it's going to make your house more comfortable, the lighting will be better, you'll be able to see your recipe easier, you'll be able to do your engineering and architecture work at home, better lighting. All true. Didn't move the needle. But when they said, your neighbor just did it, boom, people were on it. And it made a huge difference. So they rolled out this whole program. Utilities all across the country. They would send you a letter which says, hey, your energy use was X, and it could be Y if you made these efficiency investments. And did you know that your neighbors, three of your neighbors in your immediate community have all made these investments? People sign here to call here to participate. Made a big difference. So that keeping up with the neighbor is actually an important tool in the energy efficiency side, and it does make a difference from that perspective. But I think even more importantly, what we're starting to see is at the community level, more interest in collaborating on community projects and more interest in kind of leveraging each other's money to invest in new projects that have direct benefit to a community. And even communities where they would not traditionally have the resources to invest, there's in-kind labor and small investments where they're working with the utility and they bring money to the table and say, we want a community solar project here. And there are several neighborhoods in Portland that are working with Portland General Electric where that is the model. And part of the leverage to get collaboration is community benefit. If it's just you're using our neighborhood and then it just goes into the grid and there's no benefit for our community, it's hard to get buy-in and support and collaboration. But when they can see some benefits in the community through workforce, through lower bills, through cleaner local emissions, because in one of the neighborhoods in Portland, they're closing a gas-fired peaking plant in exchange, as part of this deal to build a community-based energy project. And the community is obviously all for that, but because it's a win-win for them.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You haven't said much or anything about nuclear power. I've been following that for 20 or 30 years, and there's a few people who are pushing that way, including some technological. It seems to me that it's never going to really be going to be cost efficient, to say nothing of the other problems.
Right.
What, have you looked at that and modeled it in any way?
So the question was about nuclear power. I think, well, there are two kind of races happening right now on nuclear. One is fission, which is the traditional nuclear resource that we have. Our power plants that are nuclear in all over the world are fission reactors. And there's the development of small modular nuclear reactors, which are the ones that you're talking about. Couple different companies pushing, one of which is backed by Bill Gates, and with different technologies in how the fission reaction works, how it is contained, all driving toward a smaller nuclear plant than the big 1,000-megawatt giant plants that we currently have in the country and across the world. But your assessment is correct that it's smaller, but it has some of the same water consumptive issues. It still has waste issues. The cost is challenging. And we've never permitted one yet. So there are the three different technologies, all in a race, one in Idaho, one in Wyoming, one in the Tri-Cities, that are pushing to get their done first. Excuse me. So the other part of the game is fusion. That's the sun, right? Also never been done. Too much energy, right? We cannot contain the fusion reaction, which is why it has never really taken off as a power source. Excuse me. But there's a ton of companies right now, all racing on nuclear fusion technologies. Excuse me. We had the announcement a few months ago with Lawrence Livermore and their accelerator, they actually got more energy out of the reaction and was able to contain it than they put in. But some of the companies in this region, and there's half a dozen, are doing different fusion technologies that are interesting. And, you know, again, they say no waste, no water, no safety issues because it's fusion and it's different, and no proliferation risks. Is it too good to be true? I don't know, maybe. What's it gonna cost? Who knows? So, for me, we got a lot of new projects to put in the ground. We have a lot of investments to make in the customer side and the power renewable energy generation side that are traditional technologies that we need to move on. Wind, solar, geothermal, biomass. And if 10, 15, 20 years nuclear kind of gets its act together again, maybe they're going to be competitive. But I'm trying not to have it be a distraction for investments that we need to put in the ground now. So that would be my take on nuclear. Okay.
This is carbon capture. You had a graph and you showed it going from essentially nothing now to what looked like a very big number in 2050. And I'm wondering, since that technology is being developed, it doesn't yet exist, in the overall scheme of things, how important is carbon capture to meeting the environmental goals that you're projecting?
Say the very first part of your question again. I missed the beginning.
Well, the first part was referring back to a chart that you showed that showed virtually nothing happening in carbon capture today, and what looked like a very big number in 2050. And I'm just wondering, in the overall scheme of things, how important is carbon capture in meeting the environmental goals, especially since the technology is in the process of being developed? We don't know, how that's going to turn out.
She needs a cough drop.
Thank you. Oh, thank you so much.
Oh, there is a roll there. I didn't know you had it.
Thank you. The question was about carbon capture and storage. Is that right? Yeah.
That's right.
There's a lot of R&D going into carbon capture, both at coal plants, at industrial process, at oil refineries. This is the process of capturing the greenhouse gas emissions of the carbon and pulling it out of the smokestack and either crystallizing it or storing it in the ground or putting it in like a liquid sludge, kind of holding the CO2. And it's not, I think it's a viable technology, they just haven't really gotten it at scale yet. They're doing some carbon capture and reinjection in the oil fields to help with enhanced oil recovery. So we know how to do that technology, but it has not proven yet to be a key piece that we've seen deployed at coal plants or natural gas plants or at non-oil refinery industrial processes. I think it is going to need to be part of the equation, and hopefully it will become more economic over time. And they're continuing to try new ways to store the carbon. There was a big effort under much of Washington State is the salt rock, which is very good for storing gas. So carbon capture they were looking at it as a way to use our geology to store CO2. But they could not really get it to pencil out and work. So the Department of Energy still has a program. Montana State University, I think, still has a carbon capture and storage program, but I haven't seen it utilized out here very much. But I think it's going to need to be in the mix for sure.
One of the questions I always have is government versus private. I fought PSE for years because even though the gas prices went down, their rates went up. It was not flexible. And do you see any change? You talk about flexibility and et cetera, et cetera. PSE to me is I won't describe what I was.
I too have spent the last 25 years battling Puget Sound Energy. And some of the things they're leading on, and others they're very narrow and traditional in the way they mostly develop their rate structures. I want to think about how to answer that. My sense is that regulators who help set the rates for the private utilities are beginning to change the way they think about their role. Traditionally, they would consider themselves economic regulators. That's all they are. They value nothing else. So that's beginning to change, and partly state law is changing that. And now, environmental value, energy burden, how much individuals pay for their energy bill matters to regulators, never did before. Utilities' commitment to reducing risk is a bigger part of their responsibilities now. It was not as much before, and that was where they didn't have to manage their gas contracts very well, because they could just, whatever it costs, they just pass it through. And even if gas prices went down, they said, we made a bunch of investments in infrastructure, so we're not going to be able to lower our rates because we have to recover all this infrastructure. And regulators have a more complicated set of obligations that they have to adhere to now than just lowest cost for the utility. And I think that's going to make a difference over time. And getting public utility governing boards like the City Council of Seattle, Snohomish PUD governing board to start to think about those other benefits and why they're important and those values, and not to just look at the utility as an economic unit separate from its customers and the community in which it operates, is kind of an evolution that we're starting to see that with these kind of community projects that I was mentioning earlier.
I've heard people talking about some studying on whether tidal action could be a source of power particularly in Alaska?
Is tidal power and a real opportunity. I would add wave action, thermal gradient with the oceans. So, you always know when you kind of do a dive down, it's a lot colder, lower. So there are technologies that use that thermal gradient change to create energy. There's a lot of ocean technologies, tidal being one of them, where they're working on developing them, but again, it's one of those, they haven't never quite broken through yet. And there were a number of test projects in Puget Sound, the Tacoma Narrows, Deception Pass, where they were trying to see if they could get tidal to work. But a lot of challenges, particularly in Puget Sound, with marine mammal movement and concerns about shipping, and particularly the orcas. So it never quite made it in this area. But there is a lot of interest in places like Alaska, in Hawaii, other coastal places where wave action or tidal. Oregon State University's been one of the leaders in wave technology development, and they've had deployed a number of test buoys that go up and down in the waves, creating kind of like a, if you're doing a milkshake, and it creates energy that way. So there's some interesting technologies. We're not seeing them yet on the market, but I'm hopeful that we will. I put that in kind of the hydrogen, a lot of money going into hydrogen, green hydrogen, renewable energy generated hydrogen. Is it gonna be transformational? Maybe. I don't think we know yet.
Would you address the question of dam removal in the context of hydro and the rest of the program?
Yes, so there are a number of, Seattle City Light has been in a relicensing process for the Skagit projects, been very contentious, and I think they've just reached some agreements with the tribes on looking into much more seriously dam removal. And that'll change the hydrograph. But again, and then there's the Lower Snake River, federally owned hydro projects on that, where there are endangered salmon runs, tribal obligations that are not being met in both the Skagit and the Lower Snake in eastern Washington, and needing to make tough decisions. I get that question a lot. In an era of climate change, how can we remove hydroelectric projects that are non-emitting when we need every megawatt we can get to meet those big chart goals? But I think we have a plentiful supply of other renewable energy resources and customer side resources, whether it's the demand side portfolio stuff that we talked about earlier, wind, solar, geothermal, biomass, to be able to take out projects that are killing salmon and harming tribes. So to me, those are easy choices to make, because I feel confident that we have the resource diversity that we need to be successful in meeting both our energy needs and our environmental stewardship obligations and our tribal obligations.
How about the Golden Dale project?
So Golden Dale is a pumped storage project And that's pump storage where during kind of low peak times, you use energy to pump water up to an upper reservoir. And then during peak times, you run the water down through turbines and it becomes a closed loop system. The Goldendale project, so as a technology, I love it, right? It's a great technology.
That's Banks Lake.
What's that?
Banks
Banks
Lake.
Lake, yes. The Goldendale project is not a good site for a pump storage project, particularly because there are very known cultural resources that would be impacted that belong to the Yakama Nation that are a direct impact if that project is developed. And they've looked at ways to mitigate and move it, and developer is not being as flexible as they need to be at this point in the development process. Maybe as they get further down and closer to maybe the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission saying no, they might make some adjustments. But the Yakama Nation is pretty firm that they're not going to lose these cultural resources. They support other pump storage projects, but not this one.
Where are the others? I haven't heard of any others.
There are some smaller ones that aren't nearly this big. There's one in Southern Oregon called Swan Lake. There's expansion of Banks Lake. There's also one in Ponderay County that is off the Ponderay River. Yep.
Is there a role for direct current transmission in increasing efficiency?
Yep. The question was about transmission. That is the $1 million question.
$1 million.
Everybody is talking about transmission because we're going to need more. There's just no question about it. If you look at those that electricity bar and how big it is, we got a lot of renewable energy resources that need to get to load. And the need for new transmission is real, and siting is also real. Siting challenges is also real. So when I think about transmission, I think of a couple different things. One, we've got to do more on the demand side to reduce how much we need on the supply side. That's number one. Got to reduce load so we don't need to build as much of the big stuff out in the landscape. Reduce that pressure on the landscape. Point number one. Second, our existing transmission grid, we have to use it more efficiently. So there are technologies, reconductoring lines, voltage enhancers that will get more transfer capacity on our existing infrastructure. Use it better, use it more efficiently, make sure that the transmission path is really fully utilized before we look at building new transmission. And then the third piece is on new transmission. I would say to build a new high voltage transmission line, it's a 15 to 20 year project. That's too long. We don't have that much time, given the impacts of climate change and how much we have to build. So we have to be better at how we engage communities along that line earlier in the process so that it becomes a partnership. And I know that's going to be challenging, but we're going to have to figure out how to do better siting so that we don't hand the Yakamas a project and say, what do you think? It's like, that's what happened. And the Yakamas were like, nope, that doesn't work for us. oh, but we studied everything, we're all ready, here's our package. And it was like, well, where were you 2 years ago? You could have come to us and said, here's our vision, what do you think? And then we could have designed it together. And we're gonna have to do more of that if we're gonna really get transmission built in a faster pace than we have been doing it over the last few years. So.
Nancy, one last question for you. What can we, as just individual residents at Horizon House, do to help meet those goals? What can we do next week, next month, next year?
Talk to your friends, your family members, about what they can do. Mobilize yourselves as engaged stakeholders to the city council, to the governor, to your state legislators, your federal legislators. One of the key things that we have this opportunity that we've all talked about is the money from the federal government with the IRA and the IIJA, the infrastructure investment. Unprecedented amount of money that is for projects that are all the things we've been talking about. And I think we'll be lucky if the country takes advantage of 50% of that. I just think it's just mind-boggling how many programs and where to spend it and how to get access to it and the forms, it's complicated. And I mean, there's just going to be a ton of money left on the table. And questions for your policymakers at all levels is, how are you helping us in our community get that money into our communities? Through utility programs, through transportation programs, through transit agencies. In all of those are opportunities for using those federal dollars to make new investments and to reduce the pressure on local budgets. So those would be my suggestions.
Join me in thanking Nancy.